Each week, American Artifacts takes viewers into archives, museums, and historic sites around the country. Next, we visit the President Woodrow Wilson House in Washington, D.C., which was home to the 28th president and his wife Edith after they left the White House. A Wilson House exhibit features a Brown University collection of World War I paintings and other artworks. They help shape public opinion over the 3 years that America remained neutral in the conflict. Finally, in 1917, President Wilson led the nation into what was hoped to be the war to end all wars.
Welcome to the President Woodrow Wilson House here in Washington, D.C. This home was finished in 1916 and was the home to which President and Mrs. Wilson moved the very day they left the White House on March 4th, 1921. Both of them lived here the rest of their lives. For President Wilson, that was to be only 3 more years. He died early in 1924. But amazingly, his widow, Edith Bowling Wilson, lived until 1961 in this home and had a front seat, really, in American history during that entire time. In our collection here, we have a large number of gifts of state that were given to President and Mrs. Wilson. One reason that we have so many of these gifts from other countries is because of the pivotal role that President Wilson played in ending World War I. It was about 100 years ago this month, right now, that World War I broke out. And President Wilson faced 2 tremendous crises in his life. One was the outbreak of war in Europe, which began on August 2nd when Germany invaded Belgium, violating Belgium's neutrality and provoking other nations then to declare war against each other and really begin the war. And just 4 days later, his wife, Ellen Wilson, died as First Lady in the White House. She suffered from a kidney ailment called Bright's disease that today is curable, but in her time was fatal. President Wilson faced a nation and a world that was very different than ours today. The United States had become the largest global economy by 1900, but was still not thought of as a major diplomatic or military power. In fact, in 1914, the United States had the 12th largest army in the world, sharing that position with both Greece and Serbia. All 3 countries had armies numbering about 200,000 men. But by the end of World War I in 1918, the United States had an army of 4 million men in uniform, and fully 2 million of them were in Europe. It's remarkable to think that during that brief space of time, we assembled such an army and were able to transport half of it to the battlefields of Europe, really as a decisive influence in that conflict. From the outset of the war, Americans were troubled and confused about America's role. There were some who thought that we ought to get involved, but they were an obvious minority. There were many who thought we shouldn't be involved at all. And President Wilson staked out from the beginning a position of American neutrality. I think he hoped that the United States could play a role in brokering a peace, serving as a mediator, and even when his wife was on her deathbed, he was writing a note, signing a letter to Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany and King George V of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, offering to mediate the dispute that had erupted between them. It's remarkable to think of the personal turmoil that Wilson was embroiled in during this time. We have now an exhibition of World War I art on display this summer through August 10th here at the Woodrow Wilson House in Washington. And it's timely to have this, and it's poignant for us to have an exhibition of this sort. We talk about World War I, and those of us who study it know that there were 17 to 18 million people killed in that conflict. It was a tragedy of proportions really as yet unexperienced by humanity. The engines of the Industrial Revolution were turned horribly to the destructions of cities and the death of combatants, and were very efficient in what they did. And so we see World War I as an event on a huge scale, and yet the tragedies were quite individual. And I look at the exhibition downstairs and I see the individual faces of combatants or of those tending to them, and see the tragedy of the war at a very human scale, a very personal scale. I think that's a remarkable thing to take from the exhibition. One of the images there that I find most telling, most touching, is one called Goodbye, Old Man. And it shows a World War I soldier cradling in his arms the head of a horse, obviously his horse, who's been mortally wounded. And the artist conveys that the horse is dying, the great affection and reliance between the soldier and his animal. These images are from the first part of the war when the soldiers were all European, and so it's very likely that this horse came from the farm with the soldier into war and that they had known each other for years. And at the same time he's saying goodbye to this dear friend, one of his colleagues is up the road urgently summoning him, and you can see artillery shells exploding along the road nearby, probably one of which had wounded the horse. So there's an urgency and a sadness to that image that I think especially captures the tragedy of World War I for that soldier and for that time. And that's one of the reasons I'm particularly glad to have this exhibition here at this time.
You can watch this or other American Artifacts programs anytime by visiting our website, cspan.org/history.